It's 1 year since Turkey launched a military offensive into northern Syria. Hello, I'm Imran Garza, and today's newsmaker is Operation Olive Branch.
Afrin operasyonu sahada fiilen başlamıştır.
In January last year, the Turkish armed forces entered the Afrin region in northern Syria. The aim, to evict the YPG. For decades, its parent organization, the PKK, has waged an armed insurgency inside Turkey, a conflict which has killed tens of thousands of people. 2 months into Operation Olive Branch, the terror group was forced out of Afrin. Yet on Sunday, Turkish authorities suspect the group was behind a bombing in the city which killed 3 civilians. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says it won't deter his nation's fight against terror. It's a message he reiterated this weekend during a visit by Lindsey Graham. The U.S. senator was in Ankara to discuss the U.S.'s plans to pull out of Syria. I sat down with the senator to ask how the withdrawal would work. That interview in a moment. But first, Hassan Abdullah has this snapshot from inside the city, which was once a YPG stronghold.
These children appear oblivious to any fear or worries. Their parents, though, have much on their minds. We're protecting the family's identity for the safety of their relatives locked up in Bashar al-Assad's prisons.
We are originally from Aleppo. When the Assad regime started the bombing and the crackdown, especially just after they kidnapped my brother, we left for the opposition-controlled territory, where we felt we would be safer.
For the family, Afrin was supposed to be just a transit point to their destination. They didn't know that the YPG would restrict their movement and effectively hold them, as they put it, hostage. Abu Umar's wife wanted to financially contribute to the family, but she says that contrary to what the YPG claims about equality, she had to confront a different reality.
There were many job opportunities during the YPG rule, and they were offering them to women as well, but only to those women who were their supporters, basically discriminating in favor of those Kurdish women who supported the PKK.
The Turkish government had long argued the YPG discriminated against Kurds who did not support them, as well as Arabs and Turkmen in areas under their control. In January 2018, Turkey launched Operation Olive Branch. Its primary aim was to clear the Afrin region of the YPG to prevent them from posing a threat to Turkey, and secondly, to create safe areas so that Syrian refugees in Turkey could return home. But Ankara's reasons did not go down well with some.
Ist es inakzeptabel, was in Afrin passiert, wo Tausende und Abertausende von Zivilisten verfolgt sind, zu Tode kommen oder flüchten müssen? Auch das verurteilen wir auf das Schärfste.
Ankara rejected such charges, with the Turkish military saying it exercises utmost diligence to avoid civilian casualties. Turkish officials also criticized comments from some Western governments as hypocritical by pointing out that some of those nations have invaded lands thousands of kilometers away in the interests of national security.
Kimi terör örgütlerine yönelik olduğu gün açık ve net ortadayken bu operasyonu Afrin'deki Kürt kardeşlerimize karşı gibi göstermeye, kimi bizi Suriye'yi işgalle suçlamaya çalışıyor.
This time last year, this area was under the control of the YPG. That is no longer the case. But the Turkish government says there's more to be done. It wants to invest in infrastructure development and setting up basic facilities like this post office, health centers and schools. The administration here says many locals who had managed to flee from the YPG have started returning. And it's not just them. People from other parts of Syria too have now found Afrin to be a safe place.
We left eastern Ghouta and moved to the free parts in the north of the country. We have found this area very safe compared to where we have come from. I wasn't able to start a business in my town. Here, I have started a business and a new life.
Ankara says its next operation will target the YPG to the east of the Euphrates River. In recent weeks, Turkish diplomats have been engaged in shuttle diplomacy between the Americans, Russians, Iranians and others, especially after the Trump administration announced its plans to withdraw from Syria. Back at the Umar family home, Umar is now employed. She says while they can't change the past, at least they have an opportunity to create a future. Hassan Abdullah, The Newsmakers, Afrin, Syria.
Syria has proven to be a source of contention between the US and Turkey for some time, and Trump's decision to withdraw troops has certainly created tension within Washington. One of the highest profile Republicans to be critical of America's exit strategy is the senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. Here's what he told me when I interviewed him after his meeting with President Erdogan. Senator Graham, good to talk to you.
Thank you.
So, less than a week ago, you told CBS Face the Nation, I don't trust Turkey to take care of the Kurds. We don't want Turkey to slaughter the Kurds. Have you changed your mind now?
No, it's not about trusting Turkey to take care of the Kurds. It's the YPG elements. I trust Turkey to do what's in their national security interest, which is to make sure that the YPG elements we trained are not a threat to Turkey. So I'm telling President Trump, this problem was created in 2016. I talked about it before. So I'm here to tell Turkey, as I did in 2016, I see your dilemma. I'd like to help solve it. We owe it to Turkey that when we withdraw, if we withdraw, that we do not create a terrorist corridor, an enclave of terrorists in the eyes of Turkey inside of Syria, armed by the Americans.
So when you say Kurds, you mean the YPG?
The YPG element is integrated with the PKK in my view. I said this before, just read their manifesto. They helped us with ISIS. I appreciate that. But what I said in 2016 is that you're creating a bigger problem. If this is your fighting force against ISIS, Turkey will never accept this as a legitimate organization. In the eyes of the Turkish government, they're an offshoot of the PKK. I understand why Turkey believes that. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that. So what I'm asking President Trump to do is let's fix the problem for Turkey that we caused. Now, how do you do that? You start with Manbij. You get all the YPG elements out of Manbij. You let a governing council be created that's acceptable to Turkey and the people in Manbij. And if you can get that right, then you start talking about a buffer zone.
So when we look at Turkey's dilemma, do you support Turkey's right to protect its border?
Absolutely. I mean, I said this in 2016. I mean, in the eyes of Turkey, what the United States has done is armed a terrorist organization. Okay, most people in the United States, when they say Kurd, they don't understand the difference. There are millions of Kurds inside of Turkey that live peacefully and are part of Turkish society. The problem is that the YPG element, in the eyes of our ally Turkey, is an offshoot of the PKK. They were agnostic about Assad. They were the most effective fighting force to deal with ISIS. What Obama did is he chose to rely upon this element, the YPG, to destroy ISIS because he did not want to upset Iran because he wanted a nuclear deal with Iran. So he threw the people of Syria over and he threw Turkey over. Now, what I'm telling President Trump, I share your goal of reducing our presence, but we owe it to Turkey to get this right. And if you want allies in the future, even though they may not be perfect, you owe it to get that right too. So how do you do this? You destroy ISIS before we withdraw, and you see if you can get the roadmap to Manbij implemented before we withdraw. And after that, you come up with a plan to ensure Turkey they do not have to worry about the armed elements that we've created inside of Syria.
You said in your press conference, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, you said, we need to give them something, those who fought ISIS with us, for us. Hezbollah fights ISIS as well. Iran fights ISIS. Why don't you give them something? Well, Assad fights ISIS.
Yeah, what I said is that they aligned, that they didn't fight ISIS with us. The bottom line is what I said is that if we don't get this right, we're going to regret it. we're going to regret creating a problem for Turkey, so let's fix it. Now, the Syrian Democratic Forces have Arabs in them. They have non-YPG Kurds, and they got YPG elements. What we got to get right is to make sure that that force is taken care of in the sense that nobody will partner with us in the future. So what I'm telling Turkey is I'm sorry that we created this problem. I said it a long time ago. It was a dumb idea then. It proved to be a dumb idea. So let's don't make a dumb idea worse. What would be worse is for us to leave and have Turkey have to come into Syria to deal with the armed elements that America created in the eyes of Turkey that are terrorists. That would be really dumb to put Turkey in that spot, because if they go into Syria, it's going to be a nightmare for Turkey.
Many people find some similarities with what you're trying to achieve now with what someone like the late Senator John McCain was trying to do with Iraq and elsewhere.
A lot of similarities.
Okay, and so you would go back home, you'd speak to President Trump, and you'd tell him this is what President Erdogan said, this is the Turkish perspective, let's try and thread this needle and finesse this policy, right? But you have a president who just recently on Twitter threatened economic destruction of Turkey. So is he going to listen to you? Was he wrong to threaten Turkey?
I think President Trump campaigned on getting out of Syria. President Obama campaigned of ending the war in Iraq. Here's what I told President Obama. It's not the campaign promise you make that's most important, it's what you do as commander-in-chief. President Trump will run again in 2020. I will support him. I think he's done a good job overall. But his judgment's going to be tested. You're going to be judged by the decisions you make as commander-in-chief. Did you make things better or worse in Syria?
Does he need to be educated about it?
I think he is very sensitive to the issue. He likes President Erdogan. But most people in America do not get this nuance. You know, the Kurds are well thought of in America.
But when you say we need to make sure Turkey doesn't slaughter the Kurds on CBS, people think Kurds. They think Kurdish people living in Syria. So Turkey's going to go in and just kill them.
Right. This is a shorthand for saying we do not want to create a war between Turkey and elements that we trained inside of Syria. It's not fair to Turkey. But I don't have to justify anything. I saw this coming a long time ago. Everything I saw coming has happened. And I'm telling President Trump, listen, there's a way to reduce our presence, but you got to achieve three goals. You got to make sure Iran's not the biggest winner if we leave. You got to make sure ISIS doesn't come back. They're not defeated yet. And you better fix this problem with Turkey. Because if you don't fix this problem with Turkey, the war is going to widen. Turkey is not going to accept the YPG elements with heavy armament inside of Syria to be left abandoned, to be left alone. They'll come in and clean them out themselves, and that'll be a wider war. They'll align with Assad, and the next thing you know, in trying to end the fight against ISIS, we create a whole new war. You can avoid all that. How do you avoid it? You give Turkey the assurances they need and deserve that the elements we trained inside of Syria will not be a threat to Turkey.
Senator Lindsey Graham.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Much appreciated. Thanks so much.
This is complicated, but it's not complicated, right?
Well, I appreciate your candor.
It's really not that.
Well, to discuss the U.S. strategy in Syria and Turkey's Operation Olive Branch, I'm joined now from Ankara by former Turkish Armed Forces official Murat Aslan. He's now a security studies researcher at the SETA Foundation. From Rougemont in Switzerland is former U.S. Ambassador Peter Galbraith. And in Washington, D.C. is former Syrian diplomat Bassam Barabandi. He's also the co-founder of the Syrian civil society group People Demand Change. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Peter Galbraith, let me start with you. So we have Senator Graham come to Ankara, speak with President Erdogan. There seems to be a thaw, and perhaps Turkey and the United States might be almost on the same page with regards to northern Syria and the border. Is that a good thing?
Well, with this president and this administration, it's really impossible to know what they stand for at all. If what they've agreed is that the authorities in northeast Syria will continue to function and that there won't be a Turkish attack, then that's a good thing. If there's some agreement to have a Turkish attack, that's going to be bad for the people in northeast Syria. It's going to be bad for the United States and certainly for its reputation as a reliable ally. And it's going to be bad for Turkey because it's going to get bogged down in the place.
Murat Aslan, 1 year on since Operation Olive Branch was announced and had begun, was it worth it?
Well, we have to look for the ultimate aims of the operation, which was announced by the then ministers and also President Erdogan. We know that the first objective was to secure the borders, and the second one was to prevent the infiltration of terrorist cells, and third one was to establish a secure zone to have civilians go back to their land. And today we know that the borders are secured, there is no terrorist infiltration, and also civilians are going back, which means the ultimate objectives of the last year's operation has been achieved, and currently we are experiencing it by the current security situation, except several attacks of, terror cells, which is very rare.
Right. But I mean, when people see that there were 2 bombs on buses in Afrin, when they see there was a suicide bombing in Manbij, it tells them that things are clearly not right. Does that mean that maybe Turkey is putting an overly optimistic spin on things, whereas in actual fact things are not very good right now?
We have to, check the nature of terrorism, actually, because we know that any terrorist activity may happen or occur at any time and at any place. And we have witnessed this for the last 1 week at the north of Syria. And it is natural that terror cells will commit attacks just to remind their presence and activities and have the other opposing forces or elements to be deterred. So we have witnessed such kind of attacks either in Afrin, and also currently we are witnessing it at the north of Syria, mostly at the east of Euphrates. But the attacks at the east of Euphrates are a bit suspicious, because I'm not sure if Daesh is really conducting such kind of attacks, because Daesh must be happy with the withdrawal of the United States.
Okay, and I mean, a lot of people would answer that, Daesh does what Daesh does regardless of the politics. Let me bring in Bassam Barabandi now. Bassam Barabandi, 1 year on since the beginning of Operation Olive Branch. Let me ask you the same question. Was it worth it?
Was it worth it? This is $1 million questions. Definitely from Turkish perspective, it's worth it. They clean enclave of center of PKK. Definitely is Turkey more safe as a Turkey from terrorist attack coming from PKK supporters. So from that perspective, definitely it's worth it and successful. It shows the army, Turkish army was professional. It takes its time, not much distractions on the building infrastructure. So this part, I think 100% is correct and worth it. And Turkey did what it's supposed to do for its own national security. From Syrian perspective, what we saw, how Turkey dealt with that area, I don't think it was good model or successful model to follow on. It brought a lot of pro-Syrian militia, pro-Turkish Syrian militia, who were not on the same page of secular Turkey or the good Turkey that we hope to see in Syria. They didn't deal with the people in the right way, in good shape. There's huge displacement of the civilian Kurds, who I think they pay the price, they have nothing to do with it. It creates more tension between the Kurds and Turkey, which allow PKK supporters to say, Turkey is coming to kill us, no matter if you are civilian, if you have something to do with PKK or not. So this kind of dynamics within Syria, right, I don't think in favor of Turkey. So if we take that model to say Turkey will go to the northeast of Syria with that model, I think it will be a very dangerous model.
Okay, Peter Galbraith, President Erdogan has said Turkey is ready to take over Manbij security as well, along with the FSA and other allies. Would you be open to that, or do you prefer the SDF to control it?
Well, let me first address the question that you posed to the others about the operation in Afrin.
Go ahead.
You had 167,000 people displaced, according to the United Nations, between 400 and 500 civilians killed. You had some war crimes. And this was from a place that was the most peaceful part of Syria. It's a lovely territory. There's no evidence that there were terrorist attacks coming from Afrin onto Turkey. And instead, it's been ethnically cleansed. a significant destruction and loss of life. You've also had replacement of the Kurdish population by people from other parts of Syria, including Eastern Ghouta, these agreements. And it is now plenty of those so-called pro-Turkish militias there are in fact extremists with links to Al-Qaeda.
Okay, and so clearly you're not a fan of it, right? But just to address one of the points, so we had Senator Lindsey Graham state very categorically and clearly on Saturday, saying the evidence is clear that the YPG is connected to the PKK, right? And you say there's no evidence that this would have been used as a launching pad for any attacks. In 2006, in February, in March, in April, 2 attacks in Ankara, 1 attack in Bursa. Clearly, these TAK, or the urban wing of the PKK members, were trained by the YPG in Syria. They put it on their website. They were proud of them. So this is part of the frustration from the Turkish perspective when they hear American officials say, well, there's no evidence that the two are linked, when it's as clear as daylight here. Or everything that you might have said might be absolutely true, but the link between the PKK and YPG, is it still a question mark for you, Ambassador Galbraith?
Well, are there people in the YPG who've been in the PKK? Are there some connections? Obviously, anybody who goes there also will notice there are a certain number of pictures around of Öcalan.
Right.
But is it the PKK? No, I don't think so. And also, there's a broader problem, perhaps beyond the scope of this show, but how is Turkey going to deal with the PKK? You know, it's a strategy that it's followed since 1984. Hasn't exactly worked. This thing's been going on for 35 years. It might make sense to do what Erdogan was doing, which is to negotiate, to find a settlement with them within the borders of Turkey that gave Kurdish rights and that sort of thing, maybe some amnesty. You know, Britain, in the end, had to negotiate with the IRA, which is also considered to be a terrorist organization, which committed numerous acts of terrorism.
And that's interesting.
No, and you had a result.
Okay, and that's an interesting point, but there's also splits within the PKK, because there were those who were willing to negotiate around 2011 and 2012, and those who were not in Kandil, right? But that's almost a separate rabbit hole that we don't want to go down. Murat Aslan...
They're split in Turkey.
Certainly.
Turkey is
okay, fair enough.
About this, but there are many elements in Syrian Kurdish areas that are not PKK, and many of the people in northeast Syria are not even Kurds. I mean, they're Christians, they're Arabs. So it's a different place, and it's operating differently.
And that's what Bassam is bringing up. He's saying, yes, there's a lot of major questions that have been raised over the past year. Let me bring in Murat. Murat, respond directly to Ambassador Galbraith.
Well, you can't equate Kurds with PKK. Currently, there are more than 60,000 Kurds being armed to protect their villages against PKK. This is the first issue. And the second thing is that PKK has been found to claim not a Kurdish state, but a Marxist-Leninist Kurdish state, which is ideologically motivated to convert all the southeast of Turkey to a region where an ideology persists. And finally, I want to give some, numbers. We know that 1.5 or 2 million people, Kurdish people, has been living at the northeast of Syria, and almost 50% of these people has immigrated either to Syria or Turkey. And we estimate that more than 500,000 Kurds are currently in Turkey as Syrian refugee.
Okay.
And we know that on December 9th of 2018, Ambassador James Jeffrey has consulted with the leader of these Kurds and tried to urge them to immigrate back. But they refused. Why? Because they claimed that PKK has suppressed them, forced them to immigrate, and 4 leaders of the Kurdish groups at the northeast of Syria were killed by PKK.
Understood. Okay.
Which means you can't equate PKK with the Kurds.
Okay. Ambassador Galbraith, we're going to swap you out for another guest in a moment, but I want you to have your chance to respond to Murat. And folded into that response, I want to ask you the basic question. Trump is leaving. He's announced the US is leaving. Now, it might happen a little bit slower than he initially envisaged. Is it the right or wrong thing to do?
Well, it's the wrong thing to abandon an ally that fought with the United States, regardless of what Turkey thinks of them. They took more than 8,000 casualties fighting in areas that are not Kurdish, like Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. And up until this week, the U.S. had had 2 casualties. Now, the United States has had 6 casualties. As to the character of the area, I think that I would hope that Turkey's analysis would be a little bit more up to date. Marxist-Leninism's something of the past. Actually, what's been put into northeast Syria is the philosophy of Murray Bookchin, who's a philosopher from my own state of Vermont. It's a kind of interesting gender equality, totally secular, without favoring one ethnic group over the other. And a lot of that's been successful. I don't see that as being actually particularly dangerous. And indeed, a lot of it goes to the ideals that Ataturk himself put into place of, for example, emancipation of women and getting away from ethnic identities. So, I think a peace process, and many of the people in northeast Syria don't have links to the PKK. What he says is true, is there are people outside who don't like the conscription into the YPG. That is a problem that needs to be solved. It's not a perfect place there by any means, but it's just more complex than to say this is simply PKK. The YPG, the PYD are really quite different, even if there are elements in there that have connections to the PKK.
Ambassador Peter Galbraith, it's always good to get your perspective on the newsmakers. I thank you for joining us. We're going to say goodbye to Peter Galbraith and bring in Kevork Almasian. He's the founder of the alternative Syrian news website, Syriana Analysis. Kevork, it's interesting. We look at the big picture, and Lindsey Graham on the weekend used this phrase. He said, if we don't sort this out or we don't fix this, especially with regards to the disagreement between the United States and Turkey over what to do with the border and the very nature of the PYD and the YPG and so on, he said Syria is going to become Iraq on steroids, assuming he meant Daesh is going to be resurgent and so on. Do you agree with that?
Actually, I don't agree the fact that ISIS will re-emerge and re-spread the way it was in 2014 and 2015. However, if we listen to Lindsey Graham's statement carefully, he means that Turkey is too important to lose. Since this failed coup d'etat in Turkey, there was this rift between the United States and Turkey, and there were different policies underground regarding Syria between Ankara and Washington. So one of these policies was to support the so-called SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, who are the YPG, in order to destroy this Frankenstein that was created thanks to the regional powers who supported the Islamists in Syria. But this YPG, this SDF, their power has grown into extent that they now pose a national security threat for Turkey. So if we look if we put this into proper context, we understand from a Turkish perspective that this Kurdish threat should be destroyed from the borders. However, if we look from a Syrian perspective, we will realize that 2 wrongs doesn't make it right? Because supporting the YPG was wrong in Syria, but at the same time, penetrating the Syrian soil by the Turkish forces is also not right, because Turkey is not only liberating these areas from the YPG, but also there's a huge displacement of people and also occupation of territories underground. Turkey is imposing its laws and regulations on these territories and also injecting Turkish values through education, through other infrastructure. Okay. So there is more than destroying YPG, but
okay,
the Turkish policy nowadays is to create a zone in North Syria. It's called safe zones by Turkey, but practically it's an area that would remain loyal to Turkey, whether through direct means or through indirect means. That means through either force or through values, ideology, and imposing culture over the people.
Okay, so Bassam, I promise I'm not ignoring you. I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I need to get Murat's response to that. Murat, is that what a safe zone means? Because Kevork has a very cynical view of what the safe zone means to him.
Well, what Turkey is committed, first of all, is not to fight against Kurds. Okay, there's a threat very close to the borders of Turkey, but it's not a Kurdish threat. It is a terrorist threat. It is a threat emanating from PKK. Because 20% of this country is made up of Kurds. So we can't claim that Turkey is against Kurds. And the second issue, Turkey has been struggling for 4 decades against PKK and clearly aligned all the laws in Turkey to fight against terrorism in accordance with international law. And in Syria case, we have witnessed that Turkey was consistent with international law for such a type of conflict, which means Turkish line is consistent and committed to defect terror cells, not a certain type of people or Kurds or anybody else. So this is actually a clear portraying of the picture for the Syria case, not only for Turkish case.
Bassam Barabandi, if Turkey and the United States cannot come to an agreement, there is a suggestion, and there have been many reports that the YPG has been reaching out to Assad, been reaching out to the Russians. If the YPG turns in that direction with the Russians, Assad, the Iranians, what will happen?
No, I have few comments I have to say.
Go ahead.
Number one, most of the Americans, they believed in PKK, or they believe in the Kurdish case, and they see the PKK, PYD is the face of that case, which is totally wrong, totally disaster. When they mentioned that the PKK, PYD, they lost 8,000 soldiers liberating areas in Syria against ISIS, which is true, but they forget that out of 8,000 killed, most of them, they are Arab fighters. They are not Kurdish fighters. More than 60% of them, they are Arabs. So they don't mention this just to say the Kurdish sacrifice. The Kurdish didn't sacrifice anything. The Arab in that area sacrificed against ISIS. And PKK, PYD, they are one unit. They are one unit, 100%. All the senior American officials, when they make testimony at the hearing at the Senate and the House, they make it very clear and open. So this is not a secret. It's not my position. It's very much American position. They don't want to see the right things. This is why we are here, from Maghreb till today. The Turkish-American problems is not because it started from Obama times. It's not 2 years ago. It started from 2012 or 13, when President Erdogan was, or the US or Turkish government were asking to have no-fly zone in Syria, and the Americans said no till today. So this is much more misunderstanding, miscommunication between United States and Turkey, which goes till up today. Today, when Turkey say we need buffer zone, safe zone, again, legally, by the way, it's Assad regime signed Adana agreement with Turkey in 1998 that give Turkey the rights to go 20 kilometers inside Syria to fight the terrorists, which is PKK. And people always forget that Assad regime always Assad funded the PKK, Öcalan, and they give them all the support from 80s till now. So today, we're back to your question. So today, when the PKK leadership, they go back to Damascus for negotiating, Damascus, I think they will give them soft hand to accept what they want. But basically, the target of Damascus dealing with the Kurds is, again, to empower them in the future to attack Turkey. So I back to the American kind of perspective that we have to absorb the Turks to be in good terms with the Turkey. PKK elements are well known for everybody. Turkish can ask the American these elements, hundreds of them, they are well known by names, they have to leave. The Turkish society, they are not PKK in Kamishli, in Kobani and other areas. There's so many Kurdish Syrian or Kurdish that they have nothing to do with PKK. PKK is literally have a state in Syria. We like it, we don't like it, they have the state in northeast Syria. And it's not in favor, not for the Kurds, not for the Syrian, not for the neighbors. So Turkey should defend itself, but it should do it very wisely.
Right.
Because a lot of equation play in that. Many people, they won't destroy Turkey. I mean, this is fact. Many people, they are countries, they are anti-Turkey. and they are using the Kurds for their own purpose. That's why the Turkey, from one hand, they have the full right to defend itself. At the second hand, it should be very wise to avoid all the problems and mistakes they did in Afrin. So this is the balance in between.
Kevok, is that a fair analysis that Assad would use the YPG and empower them to have designs on Turkey?
Well, there are different analyses. I respectfully disagree with your previous guest. I believe the behavior in Damascus, among the corridors in Damascus, is that they want the Kurdish, nobody wants strong Kurdish militias in Syria, whether the Syrian government or the allies of Syria. They want the Kurds to join the Syrian army, to join them to the Syrian government, and that the borders should be controlled by the Syrian official authorities. So here comes the question, why Turkey is not cooperating with the Syrian and the Russian side to eliminate this threat by allowing the Syrian government and the official forces to control the border checkpoints. If the threat is the Kurds, if we see from the Turkish perspective, then Turkey has an easy way for it to pull or to give hands to the Syrian government again, as it used to do before 2011, and to share this security threat on the borders by allowing the Syrian government to control these checkpoints and eliminate the Kurdish threat.
And perhaps a short answer could be that a lot has happened over the past 8 years, including the killings of hundreds of thousands of people. So there's a lot of mistrust, right? Murat, I want to bring you in here for a final point here. Well, I mean, I can't answer that question fully, but it is an interesting question. It's a good question. It's a hypothetical question, and let's delve into it a little bit later on another show. Murat, final word from you. For those who believe they see Turkey with Operation Olive Branch in Afrin, Jarablus, moving on with designs on Manbij. For those who believe that Turkey wants to move into northern Syria and stay and put roots into the ground, your response is what?
Well, what has been achieved where Turkey has secured by means of Turkish armed forces and Free Syrian Army is restructuring of these regions by means of welfare, prosperity, and also participation of the local entities to the governance of the regions. We see that after the military operations, Turkey has built a kind of self-sustaining system in these regions based on the will of the local entities. And Turkey will do the same thing. Military operation is just one phase. But after this phase, after military operations, Turkey will continue to employ the similar tactics, which is to, restructure the east of the Euphrates, have the locals govern themselves, and also restructure them by means of civilian help. And another issue, for the comment of the guest, Turkey cannot build a bridge with Assad regime in doing this business, because Assad regime is illegitimate currently, especially at the north of Syria, because of the killings of hundreds of thousands of people, which means after the democratic process that is foreseen by the Sochi and Geneva process, then Turkey will deal with the chosen, elected government of Syria, and later then, maybe we can contact with the legitimate Syrian government.
Murat, Bassam, and Kevok, and earlier Peter as well. Gentlemen, we're out of time. If you didn't have enough of an opportunity, in your opinion, to have a word, the fault is all my own. I apologize, but it's been a healthy and important discussion. Hope to have you all back on the program again. Just a reminder, it's 2019. This war still rages, and it's a shame on the whole world that it still does. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here on The Newsmakers. After the break, we head to Zimbabwe, where dozens have been killed and hundreds detained as protests over fuel prices grow. Is the government crackdown reminiscent of Robert Mugabe's reign?
Nothing could have prepared me for the kind of life I live now. Whenever I leave home every day with the prospect that I could end up in prison.
That was the renowned Zimbabwean pastor and activist Evan Mawarire speaking to the newsmakers in 2017. Last week, he was arrested in Harare, accused of inciting violence on social media. And he's not alone. Hundreds of people have been detained and several have been killed during protests after the government more than doubled the price of fuel. It was supposed to ease the burden on Zimbabwe's struggling economy. Instead, it's fueled unrest on the streets. Now, the government of President Emmerson Mnangagwa appears willing to do anything to make it stop. Security forces are reported to be conducting door-to-door searches for dissenters, and they say this crackdown is just a taste of things to come. Well, to discuss all that's going on in Zimbabwe, let's go to its capital, Harare, where we're joined by Bright Matonga. He's Zimbabwe's former Deputy Information Minister. And in Nairobi, we have Berhan Taye. She's an activist and leads the Keep It On campaign at Access Now, a global initiative to stop internet shutdowns. I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers. Bright, we've got reports of people being shot in the head by Zimbabwean forces. What's going on? This has gone out of hand, hasn't it?
No, it hasn't gone out of hand. The government of Zimbabwe introduced austerity measures. Basically, they had to put in measures that increase taxes so that they can control expenditure. So obviously, when you introduce austerity measures, there are repercussions. Things become scarce, but it's not the case now. The government of Zimbabwe introduced fuel prices from about $1.31 to $3. In US dollar terms, it is 40 cents a liter to 90 cents a liter. This is the current position in terms of US dollars. Of course, then the so-called trade union, Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Union, and other NGOs then incited people to go into the street. And then with disturbances on a Tuesday, that is...
but people are being shot dead, right? No matter who incited them, no matter who's telling them to go to the streets, people are being shot dead. They're being hunted in their homes. We've got a report from the Zimbabwe Association of Doctors for Human Rights saying it treated multiple cases of gunshot wounds and more than 100 others for assaults. So 68 gunshot wound cases, 100 others for assaults with sharp objects, booted feet, baton sticks, and Amnesty International saying police used firearms and tear gas against protesters. Even if the austerity measures were justified, Bright, and even if you had others inciting people to take to the streets, can you justify what the authorities have done to those people on the streets?
One death is one death too many. But when you are a responsible authority, you choose not to respect the law because they should have informed the police that they want to go and demonstrate. That is allowed. They didn't do that. Obviously, I'm sure they had reasons to do so. What you've also left out in your report is Zimbabwe lost about $300 million worth of properties. Supermarkets were destroyed. So there was a lot of looting going on. Cars were burned. Police officers were killed by the demonstrators. So really, from government's perspective and from the demonstrators' perspective, it's not good to incite people to go in the street. We don't want people to die. It's not a good thing. Maybe the government may have been a bit too heavy-handed. Right. But again, okay, so that's important.
Okay, that's a crucial point. Yeah, it's interesting. You say maybe the government was too heavy-handed, and it's interesting to get that admission from you. So, Berhan, as we look at the response, and I know you specialize here at looking at the choking and the shutting down of the internet, but is this a part of a broader clampdown?
Definitely. So I just want to respond quickly to the answer that definitely the government used excessive force. It's not maybe. 12 people dying, being shot with live ammunition can never be justified. There were many, many more people that were shot. 78 people is what the report that the Zimbabwean Human Rights Forum has given out, I think today or yesterday. Mm-hmm. Multiple dog bites. It's a chaos. So the honorable former deputy minister saying that it was maybe it doesn't really help in this case. They used excessive force, and there's no way to deny that. And people that died are Obviously, you can see like he has not been affected by this because there are many, many people that have been affected by this. And even looking at how the internet shutdown was carried out, now the court just today said that the Minister of State doesn't have the right to give a directive. It's only the president that can. So technically, the internet shutdown is also illegal. Right. And what that has done is specifically is that it has suffocated people. People could not access information. They could not get emergency and medical services. They were not able to reach their families. Even one of our colleagues from MISA Zimbabwe tried to join this call today, and he was unable because of how the shutdown and the social media has affected it. So
that's a good point.
Yeah, so this is
that's a good point. Yeah,
it's insanity.
So Bright, you're talking to us on Skype. You've spoken to us and communicated with us on Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp and Skype and so on over the past 2 years since we've been inviting you onto this program. Do you agree with the High Court that it was wrong for the government to order the internet shutdown?
Obviously, if there is a ruling by the courts, that has to be respected. But the most important thing, what we need to understand is that these NGOs are causing chaos. They are sponsoring violence in Zimbabwe, and people are getting killed, and they rush to publish these pictures of people. They are giving youngsters, vulnerable youngsters, drugs to go and cause chaos. I think it's very wrong.
But Bright, do you have evidence that they've given them drugs or weapons or anything like that?
Yes, we do. I've driven around the high-density suburbs. I've spoken to young people there. They've been given drugs. They've been given, obviously, food and hard drugs to go and cause chaos. When you see demonstrators killing police officers, it's not good. If you see demonstrators charging at armed police officers, it's not a good thing. In the United States, you get called. I'm not saying it's a good thing.
Okay, but again, one of the reasons why the internet shutdown has impoverished all of us is because it's difficult to verify any of this. Because you're telling me stuff you saw. It's difficult to find images and it's difficult to find reports because your government shut down the internet. Let me ask you a big picture question, Bright, because we've been charting Zimbabwe's new era together as you've been on the show multiple times. For many people, as they see police gunning down people on the streets and hunting people down who are protesting something that's very legitimate, they see Emmerson Mnangagwa as just a new coat of paint on an old wall, on a Mugabe wall, on an old system. Is that true?
What I can say, this was the demonstration. It was a very good cause, sponsored by bad money, because people don't want Zimbabwe to succeed. They don't want President Mnangagwa to effect the change that he promised. They're trying by all possible means to stifle that development. Zimbabwe is calling for help. The president has reached out to say to the world, this is a new Zimbabwe which is open for business. We want the international community to support Zimbabwe in one way or the other. You can't just fold your hands and say, and look, you sponsor violence, you know talk about
Okay, interesting, Bright. And this is not a good look for international investors if President Mnangagwa is trying to get money in. It's really not a good look. Berhan, come in.
So how would Zimbabwe attract investment and business if they're shooting protesters with live ammunition? That those two don't add up. So
NGOs
you can't ask the international community to come and support you.
You are paid money. You are paid money to destroy Zimbabwe. You are paid money to scare away investors. You are getting paid with your NGO. That's what you're doing. These deaths or injuries that has happened on people of Zimbabwe, you should take responsibility. You should be ashamed of yourself that these people that have died, you sponsored death. You sponsor them. You are like the jihadists who give, the suicide bombers. This is exactly what you have done. You are like suicide bombers.
But again,
you
Bright,
want people to get killed.
Bright, you've not given us any examples of specific instances of protesters shooting at police officers or conducting violence themselves. You're saying NGOs are sponsoring them, but all we have so far, from the best available evidence, is that Zimbabwean authorities have been the one beating people up. They've been the ones shooting people in the head. So you understand why we're a little bit skeptical.
Well, if people wanted to demonstrate It's their constitutional right. They are allowed to do so, to inform the police. But if you don't follow the correct procedures, you get people killed, properties destroyed. This is exactly what has happened to Zimbabwe. Yes, you're talking about the internet shutdown because the NGOs know what is happening, say in France with the yellow vest. They encourage people, they play videos, these youngsters. That's exactly what they wanted to replicate in Zimbabwe. It's wrong, it's not good to get people killed.
Even internet shutdowns are not good for business. So obviously the telecom companies are losing so much money. It's estimated that Zimbabwe is losing around $5 million every day for shutting down the internet. That's without including mobile money and the informal sector. So even, disregard the amount of people that have been shot dead, the amount of people that are arrested illegally and all of those things. But even the internet shutdown and the way that it's been, applied doesn't really help business. Businesses that want to invest want to be able to communicate with, their clients. The telecom companies that want to come and invest in Zimbabwe have spent a lot of money to make sure that the infrastructure is there and that they're there to work. But these directives that are illegally just applied here and there don't really help the business as well. So that you should also really consider that before you say Zimbabwe is open for business. You can't just be open in business when it works for you. You
are contradicting yourself. You called for a shutdown. A shutdown happened. Then the government shut down the internet. Now you are complaining and say, but why did you shut down the internet?
I don't think Berhan called for a shutdown. I don't think I heard her call for a shutdown.
No, the NGOs. No, I'm talking about the NGOs. She represents NGOs. They called for a shutdown of business. That happened. Government did shut down the internet. Both sides, I don't think that was uncalled for. There should just have been dialogue, peaceful demonstrations that is allowed, and all these things could have been avoided.
Okay, trouble on the streets. Listen, Berhan and Bright, I've got to move on. Okay, final word from you, Berhan, and I apologize, but last 20 seconds, please.
I mean, what's important here is that, to really understand what happened when the internet was shut down in Zimbabwe, and what really happened was that people were, the military and police forces went around homes, picked up people, they bit people, they arrested people, and we were unable to find much information about the human rights violation that happened in Zimbabwe, but now slowly information is coming out, and I think it's important that the government acknowledges that this acknowledges and respects the decision of the court and really unblock social media. And I really want to also ask, how the honorable deputy former minister is also using Skype. I think Skype is also technically blocked, so he must be using a VPN.
Okay, Bright, you don't have to answer that because we're out of time. I'll let that be the final word. But listen, We'll have you both back on the program in the not-too-distant future. I'm completely out of time. Nobody wants to see trouble on the streets of Zimbabwe, especially since people want the country to thrive. So these are troubling times on the streets right now. But I thank you both for joining us. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, Putin ponders giving 2 disputed islands to Japan. Could the move make peace official for the first time since World War II? Or could it cause Putin's own people to turn against him? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.